It should give us a great pause. Why does God give us an authority over His creative work? Wait, as we get going with part 2 of our series, just want to take a second and look back at part 1 of creativity as we explored the different aspects of God's creative expression as a creator: the architect, the artist, and the author. And we could summarize our application of these truths basically down to 2 things: recognizing that all form of creativity derives from God, and that God's creative expression, it demands a response from us. The great news is that response that's called for, it can be done and expressed creatively. Now, some of us hear that and think, ooh, it's craft time, excellent, right? It's like in elementary school where they dump those supplies all over the table and they just say, go wild, and our mind goes like a million different directions. We're just so excited. While other of us couldn't handle that kind of chaotic play. They're the ones that are like, where are the instructions? What are the time constraints? And can I at least have a piece of paper to form a task list? But that's the thing about creativity. Since all creativity flows from God, then every personality type, every approach, it all stems from God's own expression. And it can be called creative, for it echoes an expression of the Creator. The problem is that the world has categorized creativity down to basically certain professions and certain expressions. So to help our type A's along, we need to reframe our view of creativity. So I'm going to make 2 points, and they're going to be long-winded, and so you're going to forget that I'm making 2 points, okay? So here we go. Reframe our view of creativity. Number 1, the prescribed worldview of creativity is misleading. Now, Britannica is the company behind Webster's Dictionary. They're the experts in education and knowledge, and they have a definition of creativity. And this is how it goes. Creativity is the ability to make or otherwise bring into existence something new, whether a new solution to a problem, a new method or device, or a new artistic object or form. Bring into existence. Does that sound like creation talk? And we've already addressed this, by the way, that if all creativity stems from God's own creative expression, then nothing that we create is being harbored into existence. Only God has willed out of nothing. And we can only use what is within the parameters of what God has created. Our own creativeness is just a reflection of being made in that creativity. Remember, creativity is inspired. There is no original thoughts. And we can certainly develop something new that other humans have not thought of yet, but it's still inspired by God's architecture, His artistry, or His authorship in all that He has created. You ever heard the expression, nothing new under the sun? Well, it's biblical. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything for which one can say, look, this is something new? All was here already long ago, and it was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Now that's certainly a grim outlook on life, and Ecclesiastes is kind of known for this kind of talk. But the author, deemed the preacher, most likely Solomon, is stressing the importance of God's wisdom over our pursuits in our life. What are our goals? What are the reasons we labor and toil, and for what end? What do they gain us? What is the meaning of our work? And we tend to identify ourselves through our work, don't we? John Calvin has this quote that man never achieves a clear knowledge of himself unless he has first looked upon God's face and then descends from contemplating Him to scrutinizing himself. We cannot know our true identity, our true selves, without knowing God. Identity through the labor of our hands, well, it'll only suffice for a little while and stop that work, and suddenly it's, who am I? And to be remembered will only last you so long too, right? I bet half of you don't even know who Cary Grant is, right? And some of you are like, is she related to Amy Grant? And some of you are like, who is Amy Grant? Legacy or fame, it'll only go so far, but it's important to make a lasting impact on loved ones, yes. But to Ecclesiastes' main point of the entire book, hopefully, how we make an impact is established in God's ways, to live a life that listens to God's counsel. Now, we're going to revisit this term, under the sun, so it's important to understand its meaning. It first means the duration of one's life in this world, or as Gandalf puts it, All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given. How we toil with our hands, spend our time, it matters. Our work, whether it be laborious, creating of objects, or psychological, mapping of systems, processing, formulas, planning, or sociological, the execution of communication or presentation, which I'm thinking I'm doing a great job with, it all takes creativity. All of these are expressive of a functionality of a created world. And that not only is it in order, but that with diligent work, these functions of life, they can all be mastered. The scripture has this verse, do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. This sounds like a person who is successful. Who doesn't want to be successful? I think we all want our labor, the fruit that we produce, we would like it to be done well, that it is successful, that we are successful, right? We would love to chant, as the Psalms say, let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Just make it successful, okay? We pray that little extra line at the end, don't we, right? May it go well. And when we say may it go well, we mean the way we think it looks like for everything to go well. And God's just like, hey, do you want the real work I have for you or not? There's this notion that one has to give up creativity in order to be deemed successful. Now, the underlying assumption, right, of creativity within the worldview is that only certain people can be creative well. And so if you're not these things, then give up creativity so that you can be successful, right? And these are like certain outlooks, like that creatives are non-conforming, or that creatives have interest in disorder and chaos, right? You ever seen a creative person's desk, right? It's totally dysfunctional. Which I don't know if that's true. I've seen desks that are neat and in order, and I think it takes a lot of creativity to figure out and organize a desk because I can't do it, right? Or that creatives have to have self-assurance or independence in order to be deemed creative, right? And I'm not making these things up. These are things that Britannica is saying. Or that you have to hold certain professions, right, in the entertainment or the arts or just low-paying jobs, unless you make it big. You know the game Life? You ever played it? Right? You pick your profession. And the artist was always getting a little less money at the beginning. But I'd always pick it, and I don't know why. And I think it all depends on how we view what is successful in the game of life. Don't we examine our success based on not how we did, but how other people did, right? What were the metrics for everyone? Well, how much money we all had. How many people did we have in our minivans, right? What were our assets? And the creative artists kind of always seemed to be lagging behind and certainly didn't retire in the estate mansion. Is this the same metric we hold in our lives under the sun now? Will it cause us to just toss out our creativity? So we need to reclaim the definition of creativity, because if this is the true definition, then this is a worthless pursuit. So here we go. I'm going to try to redefine creativity for us. I'll give it my best. Creativity, our ability to represent and demonstrate the vast expression of God's creative being. How'd I do? Well, Tolkien probably does it a little better when he points out that our creative outputs are mere sub-creations, that all forms of work are appropriations of God's creative handiwork. When he says, we make because we are made. And not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. We bear the image of God. Not just because we're his creation, like being stamped Mattel or Andy's Toys, but because God made us unique in comparison to the rest of his creation. See, God made us in his likeness so that we would enact and reflect his traits and his qualities. And although that we're made in his likeness, there are still contrasts woven into our similarities. See, we're like God, but we're not God. We represent him, but we do not replace him. And we must remember that only he creates from nothing. That makes him stand out, stand apart from all other things. See, our creativity is part of our image bearing, so it must reflect that. It must demonstrate and show that we are created beings. God has directly linked the made in his likeness to our vocation. What we're called to do under the sun is all part of that reflecting of his image. And God establishes this theology in one swoop when he calls for man to be made in his likeness and then immediately gives man vocational purpose. And then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness and let them have dominion over. And then it basically goes through the creation order of what we just saw in Genesis 1. All created things. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, all created things. See, poetically, Genesis pauses its narrative and sets up the reasoning for God's pinnacle creation, us. And how we're his pinnacle creation. That in order for us to properly bear the image of God, we must exercise rule over what God has entrusted to us. And not in any which way we see fit, but in a way that reflects God's likeness that we're imprinted with. And this dominion, it gives us a form of freedom. Freedom to creatively express in our rule, toil, work of our hands, so that we may discover more of this likeness that we're made in. It should give us a great pause. Why does God give us an authority over his creative work? We're not just curators or preservers, like God's creation is in a museum, but we're inspired cultivators. The scriptures say, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him, yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. Why? Well, to help us out, Timothy Keller highlights God's creation of imagination. It's something that we completely forget that God created. And it's something that you were probably told to stop using as a kid, right? Stop using your imagination. And I'm really sorry about that. But this is what he says. It takes the imagination to sense something has meaning because we cannot cognitively grasp the glory of God. That imagination heightens us to see beyond our own handiwork and process the magnitude of God's, revealing to us that things have meaning. This is the messaging behind Ecclesiastes, by the way, that without God's glory, there is no meaning. Without meaning, our work is the sum of just striving after wind, right? You ever chased wind? You ever caught it? By creating and working with God's creation, we are exploring our roots that established our image and are longing to create. We're engaged in the substance of what God's glory produces. Exploring our creativity helps us in exploring the higher creativity that created us. But Rick, I'm not a painter. Well, that shouldn't stop you from interacting with what's created in front of you. You ever seen those movies where they've got the army outside the battlefield and the general, he takes a knee and he starts taking his finger and he puts it in the dirt. He creates from dust something that he didn't create. He starts weaving a plan and people understand it and it's communicated to them, right? You ever just done that? You just created something with your finger in the dirt, right? It becomes the work of grounding our identity and understanding in the one who formed and commissioned us. But only when our creativity rests in his. There our creativity will flourish and our work, well, it will accomplish what it was meant to. Which leads me to point number 2. Point number 2. Even creativity is subject to the fall. When we sinned, we weren't the only thing to experience the coming up short of God's glory. That the sin of Adam and Eve not only changed our nature generationally, but also impacted how we created and interacted with our vocation. We neglected, we mishandled, we were corrupted. We did it as not intended. All of God's creation has experienced the impact of us not flourishing as we were meant to. So creativity doesn't just need to be reclaimed, but it also needs to be redeemed. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For creation was subject to fertility not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself might be set free in its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. We're not the only thing awaiting to be fully restored by the returning of the King. Jesus isn't just making us new. As Scripture says, he's making all things new. Now, note the verse using the wording, the pains of childbirth. Well, this is a direct reference to the curse. See, before man sinned, Genesis 2, we experienced nothing but blessing from God. Yet in our defiance, ironically, which by the way was to pursue more blessing, like the blessings that we got from God weren't enough, we want more. And then in order to do that, we go the opposite of God. We experience then the opposite of blessing, which is cursed. The curse isn't just some unjust ruling either, or some obscure punishment that has like no attachment to what we actually did. It's the natural results to the condition of our vocation when the image we bear is distorted. Because of the curse, there are some major changes in how we experience our relationship with all that God created. I'll give you through the list. Childbearing, which is the participating in creating life, will cause suffering now. There'll be dysfunction in the roles of men and women, and creation will work against us and it'll cause us toil. And all that we build will be destroyed by our own doing. We'll build our little kingdom, and us ourselves somehow will sabotage it. See, with the curse, life sounds actually pretty difficult and unpleasant, and Ecclesiastes is starting to make a little more sense, isn't it? Remember, Ecclesiastes is not addressing the state of chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. It's Genesis chapter 3, the fall. Ecclesiastes 2 discusses basically the perfect example of how creativity falls from its original intent. And look no further than the vanity of self-indulgence. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. We have that today. It's called treat yourself. But behold, this was all vanity, he says. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. And I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Does it sound like to you, right? Sounds like Eden. Sounds like we're making our own Eden. You got kicked out? That's all right. I'm a creator. I'll just create from what you gave me and I'll make my own Eden. But it goes a step further. I bought male and female slaves. I had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any that had been before me in Jerusalem. And I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and providences. And I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep them from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. Boy, that escalated quickly, didn't it? See, his creativity, the work of his hands, it produced many wonderful things, probably beautiful things, things that we would all admire, we'd stand in awe of, we'd love them. And this harbored him success. And in the pursuit of success, well, it harbored great wealth. And then the pursuit of great wealth, well, it harbored vanity. And it harbored this endless pursuit of pleasure where he was just never satisfied. His creative expression made life very pleasurable for him, yes. And yet, Solomon, he still reaches the conclusion, then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had experienced in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and all striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. In the end, he found it all meaningless and hopeless. See, our creativity, it was meant to reflect. It's meant to direct others towards the original, not just for the pleasure of ourselves. See, Solomon, he experimented with all ways of life. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. I think the big piece of why creativity has been downsized to just the arts is because it distracts us from considering our toil. Keep it pleasurable, right? And doing so, and the more we've listened to this prescribed worldview, the more we've believed, well, that's what creativity is really for. So the work of our hands, it continues to miss out on its full potential, to magnify the purposeful Creator. But in order for us to glorify the Creator, we need redemption. We need our curse to be overthrown, which means we need our image to be restored by a pure image bearer of God. And since all who were made in his likeness are now distorted, that we go around and look around the world and we cannot find a perfect image, the original is going to have to suffice. It's the only sufficient image. Enter Jesus into the scene. God himself comes and he bears our sin. He bears our broken image, yet he is not of that image. And then he dies in our place so that we may now live in righteousness. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is the one who is hung on a tree. So he goes to the cross, what we were destined for. And then it doesn't end there. He resurrects and Christ takes his image, the image of him that could not be defeated, and he wraps us in his righteousness and holiness. And he sanctifies us, making us into his image. And in this process, he is also redeeming not just our image, but our original vocation, which is connected to our image bearing. He's sanctifying our creative expression. He's uniting it to his own. And it's no longer enslaved to this vanity of our selfish indulgence, but now is free to express the awe and wonder of his glory. Or as Anne Lamott puts it, awe is why we are here. So allow your creative expression to be part of getting you there. And know that Jesus uses redeemed creativity for his purpose and his mission, restoring us to our original intent for our creative